Hey guys, I was lucky enough to be asked by Palo Alto Networks to record my thoughts on what it's like to deliver remote training and some tips and tricks that I've learnt over the years. So this next session is effectively me running that presentation. It is one cut. There's no editing or anything along those lines, so it's as if I was delivering it to a group, which is what you should take from it. Have a look, enjoy. Hopefully you get something out of it, and I'll see you on the other side. My name's Renan. I've been an educator in the IT and security space for going on 10 years. It's good to see you here. Hey guys, I'd like to walk you through a presentation that I created for a recent seminar session that we had. It's on remote training delivery. So essentially, how to deliver training effectively over whichever remote medium you may be using. Now, we've got quite a bit of content to get through, so without further ado, let's kick into it. Now, the idea here is we're going to be doing this live. Effectively, this is all done in one take. I'm not going to chop and change anything. There's no video magic here. Let's kick straight into it. So, remote training tips and tricks. So firstly, let's talk about what remote training is, and I gathered some intel. So in late 2020, a survey was sent out to a select group of instructors, comprised of both Palo Alto internal instructors, ATP, so external instructors, and semi-retired seasoned instructor veterans. Their thoughts collected, these are their stories, right? So effectively what I've done is I cast out a net to a bunch of instructors that I know and have purposely sampled to try and gain some insights about their courses that they have delivered, both in person, physically, as well as over a remote medium. So the first question I asked was, which do you prefer? Do you prefer classroom training? Do you prefer remote training? Or is it much more muchness? And what's interesting right off the bat is about half were leaning towards classroom training. But apart from a few edge cases, there aren't many that would say that they prefer remote training. The edge cases, by the way, are people who have delivered remote training exclusively for a number of years now. So that's this number down over here. But the idea, the trend is, majority of people don't prefer remote training. Now, as an instructor, what do you actually find more fatiguing? That's a really important question as well. And in general, the consensus is that remote training itself generates more fatigue. So we're going to explore that a little and work out what that is. Some people call it Zoom fatigue if you're using the Zoom platform. But the thing to consider is it's not just us as instructors or people delivering content that feel that fatigue. Students get this as well. And that's something we really need to focus on and combat. So do you find it challenging to identify if someone on Zoom or whatever teleconference call you're on is actually paying attention to you? Is there someone on the other line? Hello, can you hear me? That kind of thing. And the majority, right, are saying yes. Most people find themselves asking, hey, can you guys hear me? Have I been talking for the last half an hour? And is this mic even on? Those kind of things. Is there anyone there listening, right? So it's another bit of stress that we encounter. And in terms of comparing and contrasting physical classes to remote classes, what about timing and cadence? Are you sharing the same timing and cadence? Are you delivering exactly like you would in a physical classroom, but in the virtual, right? And the good news here, and I think, is that a moderate amount of instructors actually do have a different approach, right? So they're having a different cadence when they're delivering remote training to a physical classroom. There's thought that's being put into there. So I want to try and extract as many of these tips from this pool of instructors that I've questioned to kind of deliver it to you. So have you noticed any difference in feedback or evaluations from the different types of delivery? So when we're comparing and contrasting your classroom evaluations versus remote style, what do you think? And this is what's quite interesting. Not a single person feels that remote training evaluations are better. They're either the same, they don't apply because a couple of instructors only do remote training, but the hard consensus here is no one feels that people prefer or evaluate higher in a remote environment, which is a bit scary. So this is my favorite question. We're now comparing how effective, and this is a bit more wishy-washy, but how effective do you feel when you're delivering in a physical classroom versus a remote? And what we're noticing is a trend. There are people or instructors who are feeling quite effective in a physical classroom, and there's this downward shift. Yeah. Few people feel more effective in a physical. Again, these are I'm going to call them anomalies, but people who deliver more remote training or have done so for a number of years. But the general consensus here is that there's a bit of a shift towards, well, I'm not as good in the virtual world as I am in the physical world. So how do we improve it? Well, I asked the instructors, do you actually experiment and do any research on what would actually improve remote delivery? And this is great. And again, this is a selected sample here, but we've got 71% saying, yeah, look, I do look into how I can fix this, because they have identified, these are good instructors, right? They've identified that there is an issue and they're starting to tackle it. How? Well, we got some feedback. Things like making sure your microphone sounds good. Things like doing more live demos, whiteboarding sessions, trying to force interaction, using breakout rooms if your platform supports it, painting on the slides like I'm doing now, right? That kind of stuff, more comedy will definitely aid, or at least that's what their research has shown. So we're going to look at how we can start to incorporate that into your remote delivery. Now, I've broken this down into kind of 3 separate categories, and the idea is we're trying to approach this peak. What is great remote training? Yeah, so it's the peak, the epitome of education and delivery. So 3 different areas. The scene, that is things like lighting, camera, background, sound. The content, what is the nature of the content you're delivering, and if we can tweak it to make it more, let's call it remote friendly. And lastly, engagement. How are you as an instructor engaging with the audience behind that lens? So we're going to talk about each of these in quite a bit of detail. I'm going to start off with the scene. So when we talk about scene, key things. 1, you want to have good audio. These are, I would say, not necessarily in order, but good audio is paramount. You want to have good audio. You want to have good visuals. You want to have a decent background. We'll discuss that in detail in a second. And you want to have good lighting as well. So from audio's perspective, it's paramount. You can get away with having average video quality, but if your sound is not like up to snuff, on par with what it needs to be, it's very noticeable. It causes more fatigue if people are struggling to understand you, especially when we're delivering like a 5-day course, right? 8 hours a day for a whole week or more, people just start to fall off, right? You want to make sure that you are nice and easy to listen to and people can understand what you're saying. And to get there, well, that's the first thing we should tackle. So we're going to look at that in detail in a moment. Camera-wise, not as important, but having an external camera gives you a lot more control. If you're just using a laptop and an inbuilt webcam, that's nice. They've come a long way, but they're still not fantastic and still bound to the physical appliance. We want that more control. We want to choose where we're placing our camera. Having automatic settings is fine. Being able to manually adjust and get the exact look that you want, better. Background wise, we don't want too much clutter. Not too bad right now. We want to keep it interesting. We don't want it to be overly distracting either. And then, yeah, you could use things like Zoom virtual backgrounds. Many people are using these. To me, I see it as more of a last resort. If you're in an area or a room or you haven't got the option of actually building I want to call it a set because effectively it is, a good training / meeting area, it's not a bad option. But I would say it's the last option. Yeah. And lastly, lighting. Even if you have a cheap webcam, if you set up your lights appropriately and correctly, you can really squeeze the most quality out of it. Good lighting trumps good camera. Now, it can be set up very cheaply. You don't have to break the bank to do it, but it can get expensive very quickly, right? But it does have a very large and quick impact. So it's something I would suggest investigating early on as well. So let's jump into audio. When we're talking about audio, obviously we're talking about microphones and speakers. There are a number of different options available to up your game. Now, personally, I'm actually operating on this guy here right now. You can't see it in this shot, but in my other camera angle, you can. It's a Rode VideoMic NTG. It's just a USB-C. There's no extra configuration or anything along those lines. It just works, which is nice. Same story with the one on the left over here, which is our, again, USB Rode mic. I like Rode. They're a good brand. I'm looking at maybe getting a lapel style mic because I tend to like to walk around and whatnot. The shotgun mic works fine for that though. And then you can move up the line and maybe get not a condenser mic, but a dynamic style mic with other hardware. Currently, I'm running on a Go XLR Mini. I can talk about that a little later on if we feel that if there's time. But yeah, choose, right? They go from easy to set up to difficult. It's not the end though. Just having a good microphone is not the end result. You need to take care of things like reverb, background noises. You want to get close to your microphone. Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? So this is in my house here. I've got a street behind me. There's going to be cars passing by. That's life. Everyone understands. We're not recording sound bites for a movie or something along those lines, but being clear and understandable is paramount. Bit of background noise will survive. So that's our audio out of the way. Now, in terms of visuals, the camera itself, well, again, just like with audio, we have a number of options. Moving away from that inbuilt laptop camera is fantastic, whether you're going for a standalone like little USB cam, like a Logitech Stream Cam there, or, which is what I'm using over here, a mirrorless or full HDMI output capable camera with a method of taking HDMI to capture on your PC. So I use Elgato Camlink along with a Sony a7R II, which is what you're seeing me through right now. That works fine for me. But again, that's very expensive. I wouldn't be recommending you buy a full frame digital SLR well, not SLR, a full frame camera to run classes from. I had this camera because I'm into photography anyway. So if you've got kit like this lying around, even a GoPro, right, will work nicely. You can capture it and have it as a source in Zoom, right? Or you could even use the phone in your pocket. If you've got an iPhone, Android supports this too. There's some software you can purchase. It's pretty cheap. There are some free alternatives as well that allow you to use those devices, which have some pretty nice camera tech in it, better than your average webcam at least, straight on your computer. So there are definitely options. Why am I going through all this stuff? Well, what I use gives me this sweet depth of field, or bokeh for background highlights and things like that. I get good sharpness, I get better image quality. There's a lot of benefits there. And another big piece of having an external camera is I can choose exactly where it is. My computer's here, my laptop, my keyboard is over here, I've got a monitor there, whatnot. I'm not bound by where my laptop is sitting. I choose specifically to put the camera there because that's the angle that I want. That's how I want to talk to you guys. I'll talk more about that in a second, but that's the biggest benefit. Taking the camera off your actual device, getting it to where you want it to be. Now, in terms of the background, again, we want to have no clutter, right? Make sure it's not messy. If you're living in an apartment and it's shared, or you're in the office and you're delivering like a seminar or some remote training and there's people walking behind you and doing things like that, cut them out with a Zoom background, definitely. But if you have the choice, right, well, if you've got the workspace, you can be creative. So here are a few different inspirations that I've collated, people that I watch on mainly YouTube, actually, now I think about it. And they all have slightly different styles. This is the kind of direction that I'll be heading towards, mainly probably this spot where I want to have a screen behind me, but it's up to you. It's your choice. It's your space. Do what you want with it, right? Be creative. Or use a Zoom virtual background. Yeah. So if you haven't got that ability, if you don't have a dedicated space that you can use, you don't want to go set up in the garage because there's no air conditioning or something like that, Zoom backgrounds definitely, or virtual backgrounds, whatever platform you're using, can work. But again, it's way better having a proper, non-distracting, static-ish background rather than the weird cropping thing that tries to happen when we replace. So options, yeah. Okay. Background out of the way. Lastly, and most definitely not least, is good lighting. So again, you don't want to just rely on the in-house or in-room lighting that you already have. If you take care and think about where you're putting your lighting, you will have massive impacts into the picture quality. Yeah, more so than having a slightly better camera for sure. So it doesn't have to be expensive, but it ramps up really quickly. So live demo. This is roughly what my setup is right now. I have a key light, which is right above me. Then I've got my camera, which is slightly to the left of that light. Then I've got some background lighting, which I've changed, and you can see it in the background there. And then I also have a fill light on the side. So let's switch to a different view right now. And what I'm going to do, I've got it all set up through some IoT style stuff. So I'm going to turn off all my lights. Actually, I'll just mute myself for a second while I give the command to do so. Turn off my office lights. And hopefully that worked. Hey, there we go. Okay, so this is my idle. You can see there's still a bit of blue in the background here. That's just not connected. It's just a bit more background color. But if I just turn on, if I just turn on my key light, that's my main light in front of me. you can see it lights me pretty well. On top of that key light, as I mentioned, I do have a fill light, which I will turn on separately, which should be here. Whoops. There it is. So I call it my hair light, but it's just filling in the side there. You can see it's pretty subtle. And when I turn that on, along with my key light, and I'll just toggle that hair light again, you can see it's just filling in the shadows a little bit. And there's a lot that you can do with this. You don't need to go crazy. If you just had a nice key light and other lighter ambient light, you'd be pretty good. Further to that, we've also got at the background here, I created these lovely Palo Alto LED lights that I made myself. So I laser cut them, and then I made LED strips, and then I soldered them together in the right pattern and whatnot. You don't need to go crazy like that. And then also I added a bit more color on the side there. So when you add everything together, and I'll just make sure that everything is on, which it looks pretty good. Come on, app. Yep, hair light on, key light on. We get a pretty well lit, natural-esque looking thing. And again, experiment. They don't have to be expensive, although I just did everything off my phone and it looks extra fancy. These are just the units that do this are just purchased from my local big box hardware store. It's called Bunnings in Australia. And we're talking like $15 to $40 for a power board that has multiple controllable slots. And then some of these are just LED globes that I bought again for $15 or not much. So you can actually do quite a bit without stressing too much about the budget there. Yeah, or you can spend a lot more and you get better quality lighting with more control. More space is usually required in that sense too. There are a number of nice options. So experiment. Now, this is what my actual desk looks like. There's a few tweaks. This has been replaced by a Go XLR now, but I have my main key light right above me. I've got my main camera just on the side there. I've got my main screen, which is effectively my presentation or whiteboarding or anything along those lines. On the right-hand side, I have a secondary screen that I would typically share with students, or the system I'm using, I project so I can see exactly what the student is seeing. Right, so it's mirroring what the student would see. It's always a good idea to make sure, am I sharing? Are you seeing what I've got here? It takes that doubt away. Now, I also have a second or third, I should say, screen. This is just a small HDMI monitor that lives under my camera, which is where I pop my attendees. So when you've got a classroom full of students and they're talking to you, instead of me looking at this screen and saying, oh, hi, Bob, I can look directly or close enough to the camera at the screen below them, and it's more engaging, it's more human. It's like I'm looking at their eyes, and we'll see that in a second as well, in the terms of the psychology of it. Further than that, I have my microphone, which you can't see right now. It's just below shot here. In the wider shot, you can see it. I've got an Elgato Stream Deck. I actually have two of those that are controlling some of the different transitions, what I'm sharing. I've got a whole bunch of Zoom commands shortcut to it as well, so I can mute my mic, stop sharing my camera, anything I want to do along those lines, as well as bring up the general controls, chat for Zoom, everything like that. Then I also have a phone charger, which I know sounds a bit silly, but it's good to have your phone on hand. It's charging there. If there's any emergency notifications, I see it. Generally, everything's on silent though. I don't want to disrupt training, but life can be important. And definitely last but not least, my gaming computer with mandatory RGB. So good, you need top tier graphics for this. All right, and this is my photo of my Stream Deck. So yes, I've got all these pre-made not pre-made, I made them myself, but preset keys that I can mute my microphone, stop sharing my video, enable or disable screen share, force full screen, mute all participants. These are all shortcuts that you can keybind to. So in Zoom, for example, you set all these different keybinds, and then in the Stream Deck, it's pretty easy. The icons themselves I made myself in Photoshop, but you get the idea. This is a fantastic tool. You don't need to spend a lot of money and buy one of these. There are open source solutions, software you can get on your phone as well. A few of the other instructors I work with have set that up pretty successfully. I like little buttons that have the LEDs in them, so it changes state when I click them, but hey, options, right? Now, that's it for scene. Let's talk about content. So with content, now we're talking about what it is that we're delivering. Is it visual or is it textual? Are we looking at pictures for people, or are we talking about just straight up pages and pages of text? Now, the human mind and how memory works is very interesting. There's been a lot of research over the years. There's still more research being put into that area. The neuroscience behind it is fantastic. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but the short and long of it is a picture tells 1,000 words, but you also tend to remember it more Yeah, we're going to look at that. We'll look at student handouts. So curating what it is that you talk about, links to certain sites, whiteboard sessions, images, other things you want to give together will help cement those neural connections or correlations, right? We want to make sure that at the end of the class, your student remembers what we've been talking about for the 5 days. And they're not going to remember everything. No one expects that, but we curate what the important bits are. So when they leave on the last day of a course, they know, they feel, what's the word I'm after? Fulfilled, right? They've successfully seen all this content and they've learned something and it's curated, bundled together for them. They can take it away. And you want to give them content that's curated or tailored to the content you delivered. So the beautiful thing is about a remote delivery, it's a lot easier to do that. Talk about that later. And changing modality. So we don't want to just sit here and look at a slide deck, right? Changing things to different camera angles, talking about this, switching to quizzes, switching to, whiteboard sessions. Keeping it changing stops people getting too bored. If you end up bored, you end up getting distracted, and it's so easy at home to, I'll just check my work email, or I'll just check what the latest patch notes are on my favorite game, that kind of thing. No, keep it interesting, keep it engaging. People will continually pay attention to you. So lots of different learning styles. Keep your students on their toes, question them. We're going to look at how we do that as well. So let's talk about visual versus textual. Now, there's a book that I read recently that talked about some research that was done around how memory itself works and memory retention. So 2 groups of people were given, we'll call them flashcards, right? Some of these flashcards were image-based, so a dog, a cat, some ice cream. The other, same subject, but in text. So 2 groups of people were given, one set were given a list of pictures, one set were given a list of words, right? Denoting the same content. Beautiful. And what they found was when they queried those people, hey, here are some pictures. Which one of these was in your set? You looked through 500 or so different images, flashcard images. Which one was there? And what they found was that there was a 98% success rate. Not everyone, 98% of the people who looked at the flashcards were able to say, oh yeah, the dog was there. I don't think there was a cake, but there was definitely a dog. 98%, pretty good. When you take a look at the text-based ones, so similar size group of people, but now we're looking at text-based, dog, cake. When queried, it was lower. Not crazy lower. It was 92%. And you're still like, well, that's pretty good. That's a pass in my books. Yeah, but there's a delta. There is most definitely a measurable difference between the two. It's better to use pictures than it is to use words. Now, again, long and short of it, images are more memorable than text. However, where it gets even more interesting and where this delta gets more exaggerated or more relevant to us is that after a week's time, what they had found was that the people who used or looked at the image cards, so after a whole week, their success rate had dropped, but only to 92%. So in other words, the people who looked at the images had the same memory retention a week later than the people who had just seen the word-based flashcards. Longer memory retention as well. Higher success rate, like being able to identify, and they remember it for longer. What does that tell us? Well, we want to at least try, to incorporate more diagrams, drawings, just any material that is visual in nature whenever possible. Use it to reinforce the topics that you're talking about. If you're using slides or you have text that you're sharing and it's a bit dry, counter it with some visual stimuli. It really, really helps. Okay. Out of that, let's talk about student handouts. Now, depending on the platform you're using, you may have different methods of doing this, but once the course is complete, after students have left, or after your lessons left, maybe you have students for a whole term, whole year, right? They tend to only recall from what you've spent all that time and effort, imbuing upon them, they only recall roughly about 10% of whatever the content was covered. As an instructor or as a teacher, an educator, you get to curate what that 10% is, and that's fantastic. So in Palo Alto terminologies, important things to me that I want to make sure people have a thorough understanding on are things like natting, right? What is natting? What is TLS? What is the app ID engine? Etc. Right? Obviously, it varies depending on your topic, but you choose, as someone who's seasoned and an expert in that area, what you want students to retain. You have to cover everything, but these are the key things that if you walk away with that, job done from my perspective, I'm happy. Now, how? How do we choose what they remember? Well, like I mentioned, imagery and diagrams is a big one. Another thing, and this is probably for a talk later, but another thing is analogies, storytelling. Yeah, the human mind works in an interesting way, and people learn things, and it's more memorable if you can relate it to experiences that they already have. That's why analogies are fantastic, and storytelling, right? It really locks things in. Lastly, as well, throughout the course, collecting the points of data, collating and giving to a student directly. Hey, we talked about App ID, we talked about natting, we talked about this tool called Threat Vault. Yeah, you're not going to remember that, but I've put it together for you so that now that I've said we've talked about all these things, and you've got this little takeaway package which has a link to Threat Vault, the little neural pathways are connecting, you're going to remember it. Beautiful. And we choose, we curate. Yeah. So the beautiful thing, as I mentioned, is because it is remote delivery as opposed to classroom training. In classroom, I draw up something on a whiteboard, we talk for a bit, we go to lunch, we come back, next topic, I got to rub the whiteboard out. That's gone forever. Some students will write or copy, take notes of what your whiteboard was. Some might even ask to take a photo, which I'm fine with, but it's not the same. At the end, they just get this chunk of notes. If instead we can give them a curated, here are the whiteboard diagrams that are important, which is easy to do in remote land, it's way better, way more effective. Okay, student handouts, done. Lastly, changing the modality regularly. So this is where we want to shuffle and change things. So people respond to different formats differently. Some people like slide decks, some people like live demos or documentation or the analogies I was talking about, or whiteboard sessions, or the LMS system and being able to download files, right? Being able to go to third-party websites, the idea of having workshop-y style breakout rooms, discussions amongst their peers, right? Or Googling things. These are all different modalities, right? I know Googling things is a weird thing, but often I'll get questions in my class where I don't know the answer to that. I could just say, oh, let me find out for you, I'll find out later, or confidence permitting, let's dig, let's see what we can find. And walking through the process of let's see what you can find will get students more comfortable in their own skin, in their own ability to let's see what they can find, which is what we want to do. We want to empower them to get the answers. We're not expecting them to remember everything, but being able to be self-sufficient. It's the old adage of give a man a fish, right? And he can eat for a day, teach a man to fish, and then he'll remember more than 10% of what you tell him. It's the idea. So we want to break things up as much as possible. Variety is the spice of life, right? So for example, I could switch discussing this with you to let's go and look at a browser and say, okay, you asked me a question about, Palo Alto model comparisons. Oh, how much RAM does this model have versus that model or whatnot? Well, just a quick Google. This is a Google of the things example. I can go here and I can see, different options and compare it, and I can walk them through this process if I like. If I wanted to talk about something that was more like a logical in nature, I might switch it up to something like a whiteboard. And in the whiteboard, I could go, let's talk about, I don't know, here is an example from my previous class, security profiles in Palo Alto firewalls. Like, what are the different options and what's the flow of that like? Or maybe we want to talk about more like generic security concepts. Like, you can never have a totally secure environment. There will always be a gap. It doesn't matter how much effort you put in, it's never going to get there. Those kind of like high level concepts, right? And different little icons and things like that. What else have I got? Lots. Yeah, session-based stuff, client to server versus server to client, whatever. Switch it up, right? Options. Okay. Beautiful. So we've covered content. We talked about the scene, lighting, camera, action, sound, scene, backgrounds. Well, we talked about content. So how are we delivering the material that we have and maybe changing, buckling away from the material? Just because I have a slide deck that has 40 slides doesn't mean that's all I can deliver. We can go through a slide, we can talk about some content, and then I can switch it up like I did and say, okay, let's look at some real world examples of that. Or let's do a whiteboard session on that. Or let's talk about it more. Or let's just talk about it. Yeah, campfire style. Let's group together and tell stories of yesteryear, of when this feature was introduced and the problems we had before that feature. It really helps that retention piece. Yeah? And this change of modality that you're seeing here, right, keeps people engaged. I hope you haven't left. Are you still there? Okay, good. All right, and then engagement as well. So now we're talking more, we'll say psychological, but human aspects, right? So eye level and perspective. Where you're looking makes a huge difference. You notice, I hope, so far, I've been mainly looking at you guys watching this video or watching this live session. But generally, I've seen it a lot, people tend to read the slides. And that's how that works. Anyone have any questions? That's not engaging. That's a webinar. That's not a classroom. Very different, right? Yes, my message, I have some authority, but I want to treat you with respect and treat you as an equal. That sounds weird. It's all about angles as well, whether I'm low or high. We'll cover this in a second. Eye contact, like I just mentioned, right? It's such an important piece of body language. We don't have it. In a remote class, you can't see the entirety of me. I'm standing here. Now you can see my arms and whatnot. But generally speaking, we're missing a lot of the information that we need, and we need to compensate with that lack of information. How are we going to do it? Eye contact is one of the only tools we have. And unfortunately, often it tends to be one-sided. I'm giving you eye contact, but I'm shooting blind here. I don't know, we've got like 90 people watching this. I don't know if you guys are paying attention, if when I say a joke or I do like that CSI style sound, if you guys think that's funny or if it's dumb. I don't have that gauge, so it's challenging. That adds to the fatigue, right? So maintaining eye contact is really important, at least for the student's perspective. And yeah, it makes them feel more of a personal connection. As I said, it's not just a webinar. It's not just a pre-recorded session. I'm talking to you. You better listen, right? Lastly, social psychology, they want to feel involved. It's important. Right? As a student, as a participant, you want to give them as many opportunities as possible to be involved. So at any point in time, they need to know where the class is up to. What's expected of them? Are you meant to be doing a lab? Are you meant to be are you meant to be doing some research? Are we having a break? If we're having a break, when are we getting back? All that stuff falls and plays on their fatigue levels too. So eye level perspective, as I mentioned, we want to give a bit of authority, but it's important to choose where you're placed here. So the optimal angle range is one where you're not too high or not too low below the camera level, right? If you're too low, it's as if your students are like looking down on you. It's like you're in adolescence. Please give me guidance, guys, right? I have to change my camera angles to get that, but you get the idea. We don't want to be like someone down here. And worse than that is if you're too high above your camera angle, it's like you're looking down at your lowly students, the peasants that they are, right? So here's the problem. Your laptop, your built-in webcam tends to be down there looking up. So you're giving, and it's not obvious, but there is a bit of psychology there that it's looking down. Not to mention it's coming up your nose, which is not the most flattering either. So make sure you place your camera appropriately, which is hard to do if it's on your laptop. That's why I was saying having an external camera is a good idea. Not the end of the world though. If you've got it on a laptop and you're going to be using your laptop on, you can always prop your laptop up. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a sec as well. Now, eye level perspective is one. Maintaining eye contact, well, here's where it gets a bit tricky. Yeah, it takes a lot of practice and it feels awkward to just look into a camera lens, knowing that there's, in this case, 90 people behind there, but knowing that your students are there, but not really. I'm not getting feedback. I'm just looking at a glass lens. Same thing applies to the remote attendee, right? The body language that they're getting is scarce. There's really not much there. They can only see, generally speaking, your face, right? So that's why that face and the body language that you can expose, is why I like a wide camera angle, does give a huge impact. Right? We want to give them as much as they can, stimuli to engage, to make that human connection. So what I did was I experimented. As you saw, I have a little HDMI monitor right below my camera, and I started off with a little Raspberry Pi one that I kind of jerry-rigged together with some clamps, and then I proceeded to build my own teleprompter style box with using a laser cutter, some acrylic, and some mirror film. And it's weird because the person I was speaking to, or in this case it was a video recording, had double eyes. I'm like, that's okay as long as I don't have double eyes. And I tweaked it a bit, I got some better film, I got a bit smarter about it, and it was looking pretty sharp, right? Not bad. And then I could have live Zoom meetings and different camera angles, different experimentation to try and get it so that I'm looking at a person, not just a camera lens, because it feels fake to look at the camera lens, right? And as I said, it takes a bit of practice. But yeah, the beautiful thing is by using teleprompters, you can trick it. If you can put your Zoom attendees or whatever platform you're using up on that screen, you can actually look at them while they're asking you questions. It feels more natural from my perspective. From their perspective, it's the same. Now, what was the outcome of this? I spent quite a bit of time experimenting with it, and unfortunately, this is what it looked like from the student's perspective. Now, I could crop out the box, that's fine, but it had a green tinge, it was washed out, I did have a nice beard. In any case, it wasn't good, it wasn't good. Now, you can purchase these, I just haven't gotten around to it. I haven't decided whether I want to do it or not, but a teleprompter can definitely help that engagement piece. or you can just look at the camera lens. Make that effort, just as if that was a person. You wouldn't be staring away while you're talking to someone. They would feel that you are aloof, that you are disconnected, you're not participating in the conversation. That's what we're trying to avoid. Look at the camera, please. Okay. So maintaining eye contact. Last one, social psychology. So welcome to EDU Peak, right? I'm a big snowboarder and a mountain biker as well. I love these style things. So I decided let's put it together in a ski field / mountain bike park style method. So social psychology, if we start at the top here, once I found my mouse cursor, there it is, right? We start at the top here at social psychology. We want to get student involvement, I should say. We want them to feel that they're involved. And there are a number of ways of doing this. So student interactions is most definitely, like, it's a huge part of it. So we want to regularly ask questions. And a pro tip here is mentioning attendees by their names, not just, has anyone got any questions? Specifically, hey, Alan, how'd you go on that lab? Or what do you think about that, Bob? Right? And there are a number of ways of doing that. You could have a tool that we use at Palo Alto Networks is called Kahoot, which is like an online quiz. It's not bad, a decent option. It works better in a classroom environment, still an option though. We also, with our courseware, offer end of module questions, they're called. So I'm just trying to change my color of pen here. That's a bit better, right? End of module questions. So the end of module questions are an opportunity for the instructor to query the class. Now, I don't just open it up to everyone. I use some tools, which is what this one is here, this green path, which is called Wheel of Names. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. We want to name and shame them, right? I know that sounds really negative, but again, calling them out by name is a fantastic opportunity. So let me show you the tool I'm talking about. We'll switch to browser. It's a free tool that I discovered. It's literally wheelofnames.com. And if you browse to here, you can enter some names in here, like I add, John's already there, Fred, Tim, whatever. And then you can spin the wheel. You can share this with the class. Just close that ad. Share this with the class, spin the wheel, and it will pick. So you have questions up and you say, hey, what do you think to this answer? Adonis, you're up. And then Adonis has to come up and actually answer the question. Yeah. Well, I say come up on Zoom or in your classroom, right? Fantastic. So that's one way to just force you're up. And no one wants to miss that. That's the shame. You don't want to be the person attending that your name came up and then, oh, he's not here. How embarrassing. And I will emphasize like, oh, he's not here. And then we'll all laugh at that student who was away. And like, oh, sorry, I had a call. It's like, oh, it's okay. And then they don't want to miss out again. So they tend to stick around for longer. Anyway, you do you. Options, right? And always refer back to students. So when you have a question that comes up in class, if someone on day one asks you about, I don't know, oh, I've got some concerns about natting, then later in the course, when we talk about natting, you could bring it back to them. You need to remember who asked the question, but hey, John, it was you who asked on Monday about that natting thing, right? Does this answer your question? Oh, yeah, thanks. Perfect. That's the human element, right? And that's what makes a good instructor. You're remembering what students' concerns are, and then you're addressing them throughout the course. Yeah. So again, the key here is student interaction is up, and we're referring to students by name when possible. Okay. Next, student involvement during lab time. It's very tempting when you have a lab to say, okay, guys, go do your work. I'll see you guys in 45 minutes. That's okay-ish. You want to make sure that you're available to answer any questions. Don't just leave. But there's a couple of key components here. One, you want students to share where they're up to in the labs. So give them the opportunity to share their screens. If they have questions, don't answer their questions privately unless there's a pressing reason to do so. Answering their questions as a group will kind of encourage other students. It helps everyone know where other people are up to in the labs. And if one student has a question, there's a good chance that another student might have a similar question, or at the very least will be more comfortable asking because the seal has been broken. Someone else has already started answering or asking questions. So feel free to make it open forum style. Now, make it obvious to everyone that it is in fact lab time. We're currently doing labs. This is where we're at. Okay. This is how much time we have. This is what we're expecting to do in the labs, and regularly check in. Now, the way I do this is I have a separate, it's called a scene, but this is what I use. So this is when it's lab time. I'll bring up this screen and you can see, yep, you're up to lab 8. These are the expectations. Before they kick in the lab, I'll walk through this to let them know, you should be looking at this data, generating some reports, looking at threats, that kind of thing. And then I'll bring this up and I will check in with them regularly to see how they're going. So if someone was away for a bit and then they popped back in, they know straight away, okay, I need to be working on lab 8. There's no questions. This is what the class is up to now. And then I'll query, how's everyone going? And the other advantage is if they are in fact doing their labs, I can not have to remember what is in lab 8, but when a student tells me, oh, I'm just looking at AppScope reports, I know that they're in the second last area. Fantastic. Okay. So that's our lab time. And last and definitely not least is break time. You need to have clearly defined breaks, and in remote training we want to do it regularly, more regularly, this is the cadence piece, than in a physical classroom. Yeah. Why? Fatigue, right? It's a different style of engagement. We are stressing our brains to suck in as much of that, body language and information as we can from the limited stimuli and medium that a camera gives us. So give regular breaks, and for me, defining when it is and what the return time is paramount. So this is what I actually use for my break screen / share. Now, before I show you that, there's options, right? One thing to do, if you want a simple way, like I showed you with word and names, you can actually just go to Google, and if you just type in timer, let's say we wanted a 15-minute break, timer 15, and you get, I don't know why it's 20 hours, of course, because it's running already. I'm going to reset that. What? There we go. 10 minutes and hit start, and this will count down. And if I go full screen, you probably, there you go. It'll show a massive timer and beautiful, and it will beep when it gets to the end. I'm just going to stop that so it doesn't trigger later on. That is one totally valid way. Some other instructors use YouTube videos and they just put them up that are specifically like that. You get nice different like bomb timers and things like that. Be creative, be fun if you like. Personally, I actually go one level beyond and I use something that looks like this. What that enables me to do is choose, like, let's say we wanted a 15-minute break. I can hit one button, 15 minutes, it's gonna beep at the end. And you'll notice that I've also got some music in the background, that courtesy of my lovely mixer. I can blend in, we can listen to some nice open source, not really, but license-free, DMCA friendly Honey Hips by Harris Heller, right? I have a big mix that I can use and switch between. But yeah, and I can turn that off and beautiful. So you have options, get creative, but it is really, really important from a student's perspective to know when when a break ends, right? If you're a student and you popped away and you came back from lunch, it's great to be able to look at the screen and go, oh, I still got another 10 minutes. That's enough time for a coffee. Or, okay, I better sit here and we're going to start any second now. In a physical classroom, you pop your head into the room and you see, oh, okay, and no one's back yet. I'll just wait outside and maybe I'll have hopefully you don't smoke anymore, but maybe I'll have a cigarette, or maybe I need to quickly pop on a phone call to book my bike in for service or something. You know you have time because no one's there yet. The instructor's not back yet. But in a virtual classroom, are they back? Are they not? They're still muted. I don't know. And you don't have to worry about time zones either. Yeah. You don't say, let's get back at 1 o'clock. You say, let's get back in 1 hour. Totally different. Because 1 o'clock is different whether you have a student from Sydney or Adelaide or Bangalore or Denmark. Yeah. So instead of having to worry about those kind of time zones, you can just use these kind of timers. Way better. All right. Now, we've talked about that social psychology bit. We've talked about the scene component. We talked about the content that you're delivering. We're getting to this peak now, right? And what does it look like at that peak? When you start to employ all these different things, you get power, right? So once you're at that point, what does it look like? Well, you start to get, and these are evaluations taken from some of our instructors at Palo Alto Networks, things like the instructor is very lively and keeps students engaged. Instructor does the extra miles in providing resource materials. That's the handout I was telling you about, right? This was one of the best training of my life. Awesome remote training, kept us engaged. By far the most polished training course I've been on. These are all for remote classes, not physical classes, right? You can do it. And lastly, and this is my favorite, just keep doing what you are doing. This one was actually for me. Now, that's interesting. When they say keep doing what you're doing, to me, the way I interpret that, it's not have these flash things where I can switch between stuff and do whiteboards and whatever. No. To me, it's about working on my craft, because that's what it is. This is an iterative process. So we've got here, we're at the peak of this mountain over yonder, which is fantastic. How do we keep doing what we're doing? Well, we need to revisit. Right now, you're delivering remote training at this level. Maybe it's fantastic, maybe not. Wherever you are, there is always, always, always room for improvement. And even though we're on the peak of this mountain, the one that we've just discussed today, there's always room for improvement. So how do we go ahead and improve? Well, when you look to the horizon, when things change, when the environments that you're working in change, when the content you're delivering changes, sometimes you just have to, let me change the color here because it'll look better and we'll go like a nice dark blue, right? Sometimes you have to go down the mountain that you've spent so long traversing and then climb up to get to the next peak, wherever that may be. And then when you get to that peak, there's another mountain which we have to go back down, right? And traverse and then, go and climb that mountain, improve our instructor craft, however it may, I'm just gonna go around the other side, however it may be, right? You always have to look inside. Just keep doing what you're doing means keep self-evaluating. How am I delivering it? What are my evals like? What can I improve upon? And there's a diminishing returns, don't get me wrong. Me spending an extra $1,000 on lighting right now, probably not the best. I should probably focus more on the content that I'm delivering as opposed to my background and things like that, because I've done a pretty good job. Still room for improvement, and I'm an enthusiast, so I probably will tinker a bit more, but there's options, right? So to summarize, we want to look at the low-hanging fruit first. What is, out of everything we talked about today, the easiest thing that you can fix right now? What is a quick fix? Yeah? You don't need lots of gear. Some of the lighting stuff that I mentioned is cheap as chips. Yeah, just be creative. If you're using a laptop camera, that's okay. Don't go and buy like a crazy Sony mirrorless camera like I have just for the sake of it. You can, for free, just place your laptop a bit more smarter, right? Be clever about your laptop placement to try and get that eye level piece, right? There are some laptop stands, even if you don't have a laptop stand, you can make one out of some books, right? To get it to the right level. Use more whiteboard. That visual stimuli is important. More diagrams, more whiteboarding, more change in that modality of how you're delivering training. And regardless of where your camera is, try and look into it so that your students and your attendees feel like you are engaging with them. Not the slide deck, not your whiteboard, but with them themselves. And the biggest piece, which is all the stuff together, when delivering, ask yourself, what can I do to improve my delivery, right? From the student's perspective, you're starting to get feedback that says, oh, this was fantastic, great, or, oh, I felt a bit disengaged. Not great, but good, because that feedback is valuable. That will give you information that you can then reflect and say, okay, what can I do in my next class in order to propel myself to that next peak? That's what we want to do, right? Just keep getting better and better at your craft and enjoy it. So that's basically all I wanted to say. Yeah, so I hope it was beneficial. We covered quite a bit of content there. And yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you around sometime. Cheers. Alrighty, well, thanks for watching that through. Smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. If this content interests you and you have anything else, other topics or anything along those lines that you wanted to discuss or have any questions for me, feel free to leave them down below. And yeah, hopefully see you next time. Cheers.